So now we are going to ask Mr. Johnathan Reckford to come up, who is the CEO of Habitat for Humanity International.
Thank you. Wow, Tina, that was beautiful. I just wish you every blessing in your new home, and you two are going to do great things. So it's never good to follow the homeowner. It's all downhill from here. I am so delighted to be with all of you, and it is really a joy at a time where the state of Habitat is strong. The state of affordable housing is at an all-time crisis right now in this community and in this country. And just want to share briefly. It was fun to see some of the wonderful work that you're doing in this community. And the good news is a lot of good work is going on. The bad news is we need way, way, way more. And we have a huge supply challenge in this country. I want to just frame that briefly as we think about it. How many of you was the CEO Build your first Habitat build? Got a few? That's great. I'm not so far from here. A million years ago, I was working for the Walt Disney Company in Orlando. And Disney would spend a fortune on what I would call artificial team building exercises and do ropes courses and all these contrived things to bring together. And I took my team out one day, and we spent the day alongside a wonderful family putting siding on their home, and it was by far the best team thing we had ever done. And it forced people to cooperate and collaborate. Interestingly, the senior people were rarely the most skilled construction workers on the team, and it sort of shook things up a little bit. But more importantly, like everyone else, I thought, oh, Habitat's a great thing to do, and they give away houses, and Jimmy Carter runs it, and I didn't understand the model, and a bunch of us had such a powerful experience, we kept coming back and volunteering, and certainly never expected that far later I would get to do this all the time, which has been an incredible joy. And I think the not-so-secret part of Habitat is that when we come out and serve, and especially these days in our increasingly polarized world, I think the service is that place where people can bridge all kinds of differences. And it is, I have built with blacks and whites in South Africa, Protestants and Catholics in Northern Ireland, Christians and Muslims in Egypt. I've built with Hindus and Muslims in India. I've even built with Democrats and Republicans. And it is, shows with God anything is possible. And I do think it's not our primary mission, but actually I really do believe serving together is one of the healing things that we can do in our country and world. And and I think it's a beautiful part of what drew me to Habitat. Tina's story shares so much of what we're really about. You are why we build, and it's a recognition that every child is a reflection of God. And what we know, and you know because you're here, but I'm going to tell you again anyway, is housing is clearly not the only need in our society. People need food and water, they need education, they need health, they need jobs that pay them fairly so they can take care of themselves. But the practical reality is if you pull housing out of that equation, none of those other pieces work. In many ways, it really is a prerequisite or foundation. And increasingly in our society right now, it is also a piece of this huge wealth gap in our world. So for those of us who have lived through the last 2 years, and who's had fun leading through COVID, this is, I think for every leader I know, including me, this has been the toughest leadership challenge I have experienced in my long tenure. And when I think things are hard, a friend of mine said, when you think leading is hard for you, just think about Moses. He led 1 million complaining people in the desert for 40 years and never got where he was going. I'm sure there were days he was thinking, I wish I'd said to Pharaoh, let some of my people go. Because this is, we are in a stressed and challenged time for leadership. And in a way, it has revealed and exacerbated what was already an economic divide and a housing crisis. So for those of us who have knowledge work we could do by video, who had a safe place in which to shelter, and who had assets, financially, it was a health crisis, but financially COVID was good for a significant segment of society. Flip that to people who did not have a safe place in which to shelter, who were service workers and frontline workers, and who did not have assets. it's been a tragedy, and it's exacerbated the divide that already existed. So we have created an economic gap, and of course there's a racial component that correlates very tightly with that. And so the biggest surprise in many ways for COVID was that it drove housing prices up. And we certainly anticipated when it hit that there would be a recession and that would pull prices down and we'd see incomes go down. What happened is the split. Suddenly you have so much cash in the economy. You had private investors buying land. You had people all wanting more living space from which to do their work and family time at home. And so everybody wanted, and all those millennials that people said never wanted to own a home, turns out they did want to own a home. They just had too much debt, and now suddenly they were forming families and wanted to buy. All those forces came along with supply chain disruptions and challenges and cheap money, which is good for low rates, but that amount of cash has created historic increases in land prices and housing prices. So we are seeing skyrocket. I don't have to tell you, you're seeing it every day in Florida, which is one of the epicenter states certainly in terms of where we're seeing these increases. And that is just putting the math out of reach. And it's really a core math problem at its heart. The good-hearted builders, and we are as good-hearted a builder as you'll ever find, cannot build something inexpensively enough for a family at below median income to be able to afford to purchase or rent on their income without subsidy in land or financing. And that's true countrywide and actually true globally right now. So it is a huge, huge challenge. And I want to talk about those forces because the heart of Habitat's strategy in many ways pivoted many years ago when we realized even though we were growing really fast, and Habitat's one of the largest private home builders in America, one of the largest global home builders, we realized even if we grew at our current growth rate, in order to hit our mission, which is everyone having a safe, decent, affordable place to live, it was going to take 1,039 years, which seemed like a really long time. So we changed our framing question from how many houses can we build, which is a really good question, to what would it take to meaningfully reduce the housing deficit in every geography that we serve and every country that we are in. And that's a much more frightening question and requires a systemic approach to thinking about it. And so we changed our strategy to say we want to build more than ever. It's not instead of building, but we did a couple things. One, we wanted to reframe our volunteers less as a construction strategy, and with all due respect to the amazing skills on this terrace, largely many of our volunteers are not, their number one skill may not be construction. But what we wanted to use that experience and understanding of the need to turn people into volunteers and advocates for better housing for everyone. So in the big picture, if we can engage all these millions of volunteers, get them to better understand why we have a housing crisis, and then turn them into hopefully donors and advocates for better housing for everyone, that can help start us change the enabling environment. Because our cities were actually designed to be segregated economically. And that's a relatively recent phenomenon. Pre-cars, all cities were mixed income. And it's only with the advent really of the suburbs that we started creating economic segregation. And then intentional, sadly, starting in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, intentional racial segregation on top of that. And those go together. So we have zoned our cities in a way that makes it very difficult to build enough affordable housing. And that's a huge challenge. And then we have just not seen incomes rate up. If you think back, 50 years ago, a single family making median income could buy a home. And that was not an atypical thing. And now that is a huge, huge stretch. So our goal, and we've done a better job in some other countries, is if we can use the volunteers, change the enabling environment through policy change, and then we can start lowering the barriers so the families could access housing on their own, that can start to scale. And I'll give you a couple of examples of where it's worked well. If you take a country like Cambodia, you've got families who have lived on land for generations but don't have the legal title. So the first step is it doesn't make sense to invest in your land if you can't prove you live there. So we put in a huge advocacy effort around regularizing or formalizing and getting tenure or title for land, especially for women and marginalized groups. So now they had an asset. The next barrier was no banks would lend to them. So we actually became a global leader in housing microfinance and started teaching the microfinance industry that there was a market opportunity to give not full mortgages, but home improvement loans to very low-income families as a diversification strategy. And to prime that, we created our own wholesale housing microfinance fund, raised $100 million, and started training with technical support and lending to microfinance banks so they would start housing portfolios. The really cool thing is that $100 million has directly helped over 1 million people in 32 countries get improved housing. It's leveraged, by this point after 8 years, $7.2 billion of lending from those microfinance banks. So that's starting to demonstrate scaling. And those typical loans are for very, very low-income families. So we're talking $300, $400, $500 loans for a roof, a floor, a spare room so the girls and boys could be separated or a business could be run. And then the next step has been, can you improve the supply chain? Huge issue for everybody right now. So we have a shelter venture lab and a tech accelerator, and we're partnering with private sector entrepreneurs who are coming up with better building products for low-income families. And then we're also using apps and technology to help people in those communities have access to better skilled trades and to good quality materials so that they get more value for the money that they have borrowed. And the goal there is that we are catalyzing a market that starts working where Habitat doesn't have to touch every. Now we're still building homes and hopefully continue to build more homes than ever. We've tried to think about this for the US, and the challenge in many ways is figuring out that market failure mechanism. And historically the market worked fairly well. We thought we don't need that in the US or other high income contexts. The market works. Well, now the market doesn't work. And so how do we, and this is where you all come in, how do we take the business leadership in the community, the civic leadership, and the political leadership and put the heads together? Because the only way to solve this is a multi-sector solution. It's going to take everybody, and there's no magic bullets. I wish we had a magic bullet that would create huge amounts of supply of housing. But it's messy, it's slow, and I think there's some pain and some gain for everybody. We need carrots for developers and probably sticks to create mixed income and inclusionary building. We need to make it faster and easier to build. That will make the private sector happy, and we've got to streamline and simplify the building process so we can build faster and more. And we've got to build in the right places. And I think if everybody wins, actually, if we build mixed income, mixed use, because people ought to be able to live close enough to work so that we don't choke all the roads and create traffic, which is the externality of everybody going further and further and further to get driving for affordability, as we know so well. So it's an integrated, I don't pretend it's easy, but then you meet people like Tina, and these big numbers start becoming personal. And I always think about my friend Boris, who just inspires me every time I talk to him. And Boris grew up in Charlotte, North Carolina, not too far from here. And Boris was one of those kids who could have been lost. He lived in a neighborhood called The Hole, and you can imagine how great a neighborhood was that everybody called it The Hole. And there were shootings all the time. They had no indoor plumbing. Boris was acting out, failing first grade, and then he said, you know, everything really changed for me. In third grade, my mom qualified to buy a Habitat home in Optimus Park. There's power in the name, moving from The Hole to Optimus Park. And it turns out he was really a bright kid, and he got some mentors, he got some teachers that paid attention to him, he had a community around him that supported him, and he took off. He got a full scholarship to Davidson College, he got an MBA, he had a successful career first in banking and then in affordable housing, and he's the first person that I know of that grew up in a Habitat home to serve on our international board of directors. And you meet Boris, and you just think, wow, the world is a better place because Boris is in it. He just is one of those great human beings. But then I also pause and think, what about all the other boys and girls out there who just need that chance to grow into all that God intends? And how do we at least create that path, that opportunity for them? And so I just want to challenge you. I don't pretend any of this is easy. I think housing, unfortunately, has gotten so bad that it's finally visible. We have always been saying this. For a long time, if you said, what's the greatest need in town? Housing would show up like 5th, 6th, 7th. If you ask somebody who didn't have adequate housing, be at the top of the list. But this is a serious issue at a serious time. And I would just ask that as you think about the influence you have and how you can play, absolutely, please support Habitat's efforts here. But help Habitat more than build more Habitat houses, though we need a whole lot more Habitat houses in this market. But think about what would it take to fundamentally transform so that we built enough housing that anybody in this town could afford to rent or purchase on a reasonable percent of their income. We would view reasonable as targeting 30%. And we know that already, even before COVID, 1 in 7 families were paying over 50% of their income on rent. And it's only getting worse. And you think about the choices that means if you're paying all that on rent, and then you've got to pay utilities, then you've got to pay transportation. That leaves brutal and unreasonable choices in terms of what you don't have money for in the ways that you want to care for your family, as we all do. So it is so exciting to be here with you. I am so thrilled that you've had this experience. For those of you who are new, for those of you who are regulars, I hope it reminds you of what community can be. And I think that's really the secret sauce of Habitat, is when you're out there on the build site, meeting the families and seeing it in action, we feel community in a way that is so desperately missed right now, especially after 2 years of video life. And I think, and I hope we can spread that sense of community in a way that models the kind of society, town that we all want to be a part of. So thank you for what you've already done. Thank you for what I hope you will do. And God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Johnathan. A lot to think about, and challenge accepted. We're going to do our best. We're going to chip away at it.